Thank you. So one of the drawbacks about people reading out your blurb from your web page is you realize how incredibly crap it is, and you need to update it. So that's the first thing I'm going to write down today. Thank you, Stephanie, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here, and I'd like to thank Talita, Jill, and ISQOLS for setting this up and being so efficient. What I'm going to talk about today is a joint paper with Elodie Gemaille from Dauphine and Conchita D'Ambrosio from the University of Luxembourg on roads and well-being. So our big question, I hope you can all hear me, I kind of shout, so I hope that's going to work. Our question is whether roads, being next to a paved road, is good for people, and our answer is yes and no at the same time. So this is the classic economics answer, and I'm going to explain to you how we get to that and how we should perhaps interpret it. So the overriding area is what can we do to make people's lives better, and what we're thinking of here is not individual level treatments like unemployment benefits or some kind of social safety net or things like that. It's more public goods, sort of institutions or whatever, or goods that we provide that are available to all people within a certain country or geographic area. And our public good here is going to be paved roads. A paved road could be either a primary road or a secondary road, but it has to be accessible and passable by both cars and trucks in every season of the year. Okay, so that's the definition of a paved road that we should bear in mind. Why are we interested in this? Because it's considered to be one of the prime vectors of development. Jeff Sachs has argued that distance to markets is one of the key variables in determining development, not only in Africa, but everywhere. And of course, a distance to a market in terms of not geographical distance, but how long it takes you to actually get there is a function of what the road is like. Some of the other factors he identifies are diseases, so that's health, and drought, so access to water. Okay. So we're not the first to think about the role of transport in economic development, as you can see. Maybe I should put myself here, that way I can see what the slides say. A number of people have worked on this, but their outcomes have been typically very economic outcomes. Local GDP, how much trade you have, the level of consumption or labor supply, this kind of thing. Most of the evidence we have is single country, which brings the question of whether what we find in Benin is actually applicable to South Africa, or whether it's also going to be found in Ethiopia, or are there single country specificities that make this a kind of interesting factoid, but not much use if you're thinking about broadly development in Africa or indeed worldwide. So what we're going to be able to do here is contribute to this literature, firstly, not with single country data, but with harmonized cross-African data on 24 separate countries. I know Martijn yesterday was saying one of the issues, if you like, with working on well-being in Africa is data, with which I entirely agree, but there is some really good data available that I think is quite underexploited. And we are going to use data from something called the Afrobarometer, which is repeated cross-section across all sub-Saharan African countries. Actually, it might be all African countries, can't think about that now. With fairly large samples, about 1,000 or 2,000 people in each country. And this data set has information on two separate measures of well-being, so we're going to go beyond looking at trade, beyond labour supply. We're going to look at well-being, both access to basic needs. Do you have food? Do you have water? Things of that nature. And a self-reported subjective evaluation of how well my life is going. This is going to be living conditions. Now, what's great about the Afrobarometer is not only it's harmonised, not only does it have well-being measures, it's also geocoded. So we know exactly where people are. We know their latitude, we know their longitude. And that means we know how far they are away from things. Things like rivers, things like markets, and things like roads. And that's what we're going to exploit here. If only it was so simple that we just measure the distance to a paved road and say, hey, people who are closer to a road are doing better. There are two reasons why we can't really do that so simply, one of which a lot of you who do applied work will know the problem of endogeneity. This is the curse of applied work outside of laboratory, is that we do not randomly build roads. We build roads for a reason, and that reason may be correlated with individual well-being. So we're going to have to use a technique called instrumental variables to try to get random allocation of roads. And the second problem is that people tend to move as well. So we can build a road and then people migrate to be close to the road. That's typically what happens. Some people may migrate away from the road, but people shift around. That means that the people we observe close to a road may be different from those who are further from a road. And that's going to bias our estimate of the effect of roads on well-being. So it sounds like a really simple question, and it's kind of not. We have two measures of well-being: access to basic needs, and then subjective living conditions. I'll give you the definition in a second. We expect individuals closer to a road to have better access to basic needs like food and fuel, because roads are a vector of transport, they bring things. But the effect on living conditions is actually more ambiguous. Roads bring goods, they bring water, they bring fuel, things like that, but they may also act as vectors of disease, for example, with greater transit leading to greater transmission of illness, and there is an obvious rise in pollution, there's a reduction in forest cover, so there are environmental effects as well. So overall, it's really quite complicated, and we don't know exactly what to expect. So, of course, your first reaction faced with all these difficulties is think, sod it, I'm going to go and work on something else. It's much too difficult. I can't figure all of this out. But luckily, thanks to my co-authors, we pushed on, and we think we can make some progress here using multi-country data from Africa, from the Afrobarometer. We're going to use the 5th round, that's in the early 2010s. And as I say, there are around 1,000 to 2,000 people per country And they are going to be interviewed. You have to kind of stay awake here, if you don't mind, just for a second. They're going to be interviewed in what are known as enumeration areas. This is a stratified sample, so it's randomly selected, nationally representative enumeration areas, and there are 3,400 of these, so about 10 or 12 per country. They're dots, okay, geographically located dots. Within each dot, so it's a point like here, like this podium. Our enumerators, that's the people who do the surveys, are going to walk in one direction, and they're going to interview the 5th household they see, the 5th dwelling they see, and then the 10th dwelling they see. Then they're going to start again and go at right angles. 5th and 10th. Then they go the 5th and 10th, they go 5th and 10th. Typically 8 random households per enumeration area. Sometimes 16, sometimes 24 due to oversampling. But that's the principle. And for each household, they randomly switch between an adult male and an adult female. So this is gender balanced, random interviewing within random enumeration areas. And the reason I'm kind of insisting on this is the well-being questions, you can see them here, your own present living conditions, have you gone without enough food, etc., are asked to the individuals. So I've got 8 responses per enumeration area. And then, because these are geocoded enumeration areas, I know how far these people in that enumeration area live from a road. Right, okay, that was a bit long, but that's the setup. So 3,400 distances to road, and then 30,000+ reports of how well me and my family are doing. That's the way this thing is constructed. Okay, is there anything else I want to say about this? Oh yeah, the dependent variables. This is a fairly standard Likert scale question on how well you're doing. It's not a satisfaction question. You want me to hold that?
Fantastic.
She wants me to hold, oh my God. Elvis is here, right? You want me to do that? Okay, I thought I was shouting quite well, but I'll try and tone the volume down now. Okay, so the 2 dependent variables are on living conditions. I say a Likert scale from very bad to very good, and that's the end of the presentation. Oh no, here we are. Okay, and then 4 questions about access to basic needs. Have you or your family gone without food, water, medical treatment, or fuel? Again, on a Likert scale from never to always. And those are the 2 aspects of well-being we're going to be looking at. One a little bit more subjective, one in terms of access to the things that are necessary for a decent life, if you like. Okay, don't need to say much more about that. What did Africans say in around 2012 about their well-being? Well, firstly, in terms of their living conditions, they thought they were pretty bad. So over 50% of respondents, and again, this is across 24 different countries. This is not specific to Angola or specific to Democratic Republic of the Congo. Across all of these countries, over 50% thought their living conditions were bad or very bad, and less than 1 in 3 thought they were good or very good. So obviously a kind of skew towards bad living conditions. With respect to the access to basic needs, we have, it's a problem with these things, I need 3 hands. Here we go. Around 50% of respondents say they were never deprived with respect to food or water, or here we go, medical care or cooking fuel. but there is a long tail of people who were sometimes or often deprived with respect to these, what are called in the literature, basic needs, things that are considered to be essential to a decent life. That deprivation is actually the least for, what do I need to do here? Press that one? There we go. It's actually the least for access to cooking fuel. But there's still substantial deprivation in all four of these. So our dependent variables, these are the things we're going to try to explain, including by how close you are to a paved road, are this subjective measure of self-assessed living conditions. That's on a 1 to 5 scale, I'm sure you remember, and the average score is about 2.6. So the average is the average of 1 and it's not the average of 1 and 5 because that's 3. It's a little below the average of the responses. And the objective well-being, I call it objective well-being. Some people are going to get antsy about that, but the access to basic needs is just going to be the sum of the answers to these 4 questions on access to water, medical care, and so on. That's going to be on a 0 to 16 scale, and I'm going to actually switch the answers so that 0 is the worst. I've always been deprived in all 4 dimensions. 16 is the best. I've never been deprived in any of the dimensions. So for both of these, higher numbers, better. Okay, that's what we should bear in mind. Just to note that the correlation coefficient between these 2 measures is pretty low. It's 0.2, which means that most of the variation in what people think about their current living conditions is not related to this access to basic needs. These seem to be 2 largely separate phenomena, and we're going to come back to that when I show you the empirical results. Okay, here's a map. These are the enumeration areas. So these are where our interviewers are dropped, as it were, the points from which they start walking, north, east, west, and south. And I'm just showing you West Africa here because otherwise it gets a bit too dense. So there are a lot of these. There are a lot of enumeration areas. Did we just say that? We know where they are. Right. And we know where they are, and our right-hand side variable is going to be how far are these enumeration areas from a paved road. This is the map of the African countries that we're going to analyse, showing you, firstly, where the paved roads are concentrated. I guess I should go over here as well. Where the paved roads are concentrated. And secondly, what we're going to use as an instrument to try and get exogenous variation in this map here. So firstly, this is what is. This is what Africa looked like 12 years ago in terms of paved roads. Again, passable in all seasons for cars and trucks. Okay, and you can see that these paved roads are, as unsurprisingly, heavily concentrated around urban areas. That is Abidjan. I'm going to get this wrong, aren't I? Abidjan, Accra, and Lagos. Is that right? Abidjan, Accra, and Lagos. Around here, of course, that's Pretoria. Down here, and that would be Nairobi up here. So they're where, you know, cities have roads, which is one of the least surprising things I'm going to tell you today. But that's where the actual roads are. What we want to do for empirical analysis, for what we call causal analysis, is try to randomly vary where these roads are. Find an exogenous cause, a kind of random cause of where we put these roads, what we call an instrument. And the instrument we're going to use is one that's widely used in the literature, and that's good because it means it's not my choice, therefore it's not my problem, which is what's called hypothetical lines. Hypothetical lines connect primary and secondary cities, ports, and the capital city in 1900. So 110 years earlier, I'm going to identify these things, capital, largest, second, port, and so on, and I'm going to draw a straight line between them, and those are hypothetically where roads might have been built. Sometimes they're built, sometimes they're not built. That's going to be my instrument. And the second of these maps of Africa, the one on the right, shows you where these hypothetical lines are. And there aren't that many of them, partly because there weren't that many big cities in African countries in 1900. Of course, every country had a capital. Not every country had other big cities. Not every country had a port. The landlocked ones, of course, by definition, did not. So that's our map of the hypothetical lines here, you can see. And I'm going to use distance to these hypothetical lines as an instrument to explain where the actual roads are today. That's my... I'm making you work here. Oh, sorry about that. Well, I mean, come on. You're salaried. You should do something. Right, what am I going to say here? No, that's it. That's it. That's my source of exogenous variation. OK. Let me try and turn that round with one hand. Good. I think we just said that. We pretty much just said that. So we're almost there, except we're kind of not. One of the issues with instrumental variables is treatment, whether a certain place is treated or not. And I'm not going to get too much into this, but let me just give you an example of an EA, so an enumeration area where one of our guys or girls is dropped and interviews people. Say it's in the suburbs of Dakar. And they go and interview people in the suburbs of Dakar, and this happens. I can't pretend that the location of a road, a paved road, in 2010 in the suburbs of Dakar is somehow influenced by the presence of a paved road, this hypothetical line. In other words, communities, that's another word for enumeration areas, that were close to a paved road in 2010 were already close to a paved road in 1900, and I'm not explaining anything. So that's an issue. I want to be able to explain where the roads are today using these hypothetical lines, a sort of exogenous variation. Long story short, just to tell you what we're going to do about that, is I'm going to progressively eliminate people who are interviewed close to capital cities or big cities or ports, and all of our results are going to refer to observations that are at least 10 kilometers away from an existing large town port or capital in 1900. That was one of the longest sentences I've ever said. What we're going to get here then are people who are plausibly treated by the hypothetical line exogenous instrument. Good. Right, where are we? We are here. And I'm not here. Yes, I am. OK. So, summary statistics in this kind of non-historically close to capital sample, the mean distance to a paved road is 13 kilometers. So most people are not particularly close to a paved road when you randomly survey individuals across Africa. I'm going to give you the mean log distance to a road as well, because any of you work in applied economics, you know that everything is log. Just everything works in a log way. In words, why do we use log? The intuition is that an extra kilometre from a road matters much more when you're 3 kilometres from a road than it does when you're 63 kilometres from a road. So that gives you a concave transformation. We're going to use log, and the data love log, so that's fine. On the contrary, the mean distance to a hypothetical line is over 100 kilometres, and you can understand that when you look at this map here. Many observations, especially in the interior of the country, are an extremely long way from one of these hypothetical lines. Okay, I don't think I need to say much more about that, except that for those of you who love numbers, and I know we all do, this is the mean of the log distance. It is not the log of the mean distance, for those of you who are working away your calculators at this moment and saying, hey, log 13 is not 1.86. No, it's not. So this is the mean of the log, not the log of the mean. Okay, just to get that clear. All right, so we are almost there. Up, where are we? This is what we're going to estimate. This is a naive approach to estimating the effect of access to a distance to a road on well-being in Africa, or indeed anywhere. The well-being of individual I is a function of how far that individual is away from a paved road. I've got a few control variables. These are all exogenous. They're predetermined, and there's going to be very few of these: age, gender, and then latitude, longitude, and altitude of the enumeration area. Those help to control for things like productivity and growing crops, that kind of thing. Regional fixed effect and an error term. So one last time, and I promise I'm never going to do this again, right? This is the way the data is set up. After I kick out the people who are too close to a historical capital or large city, I've got around 33,000 observations, something like that. 24 countries. Within those, across those 24 countries, I've got about 300 enumeration areas. That's complete bullshit, actually. Let me start that one again. 24 countries. Within those 24 countries, I've got 300 what we call regions. So these are the largest subnational decomposition, spatial decomposition. I've got 3,400 enumeration areas, and within each enumeration area, I've got around 10 or 11 individuals. The only reason I'm saying that is the delta R here is a regional fixed effect. So everything I'm going to tell you is within region. Okay, so it's quite a tough specification here. I'm going to look at enumerations, areas that are closer to a road or further than a road within one region of one country in Africa. That's the way this is set up. Right, I will never say that again. Okay, that's all we want to know. I'm going to estimate this linearly because we all know that OLS rules, right? And we don't have to do order probits or logits or anything like that. We will do them, but mostly we don't have to. Okay, so that's naive because it's not taking into account the fact that this distance is not exogenous. We might build roads where people are richer, we might build them where they're poorer. In order to deal with that, we're going to use the instrument, that's the distance to the hypothetical line, which is the variable z here. That's measured at the enumeration area level, so it's a ZJ. Shows you how far that enumeration area is from a road. Oof, and we're going to deal with migration a little bit later on. So we are now ready. We've got the dependent variable, we've got the right-hand side variables, we've got a selected sample that we think is kind of good, and we have an instrument. So this is essentially the paper in one table. This is the only thing you need to look at. I hope you can see it. This presentation was prepared in LaTeX, which I don't control at all, I don't understand. So I can't make the numbers any bigger than this. Sorry about that. For those of you who are way at the back, this may seem like some kind of sight test. It is. What should we read here? Firstly, this is the naive regression with respect to living conditions, column 2. Distance to a road attracts a negative coefficient for living conditions. In words, the further I am from a road, the worse off I am in what I say about my living conditions. I tell my students, look at the sign, that's negative. Look at the significance, it's significant, so it's a real thing. The third thing is look at the size. How big is this effect? And here is absolutely tiny. So we can calculate, and I will spare you the details, in terms of a beta coefficient, that's the correlation of standard deviations, a 1 standard deviation rise in the distance to the paved road gets you about 3% of a standard deviation worse living conditions. In other words, it's economically totally irrelevant. It just is not important. And as you may know, standard deviation is about 34% of the probability mass once you start from the mean. So this is a big movement in distance, giving you almost exactly nothing. However, once we turn to the lack of deprivation score, this is how easy it is for me to access water, fuel, medicine, and so on, we get a much larger effect that is significant as well. Okay. That's the naive, uninstrumented regression. What do I conclude from that? Roads are really good at bringing you access to basic needs. So in terms of material deprivation, they're very good. In terms of subjective evaluations of how good my life is, they're kind of meh. It's a tiny effect, but it's not very important. Of course, we shouldn't pay any attention to that because it's potentially totally wrong, because I'm not instrumenting, so let's instrument. He said, going the wrong way. Let's instrument. Everyone's done Econometrics 101, right? We all enjoy that a great deal. Anyway, this is the instrumental results. This is the what we call the first stage. Do hypothetical lines explain where current paved roads are? So what I'm trying to do here is we explain this map by the ochre lines on the right-hand side map. Can I get any kind of predictive value? And the answer is yes, I can. That's what the first stage tells you here. And the thing we should probably look at is the F statistic, and that's large enough that there is some variation that I can exploit. Okay. Given that first stage is good, let's look at the second stage, which is do distances to paved roads explain well-being in Africa? In terms of living conditions, absolutely not. no correlation whatsoever. We previously had a tiny effect, now we have no effect whatsoever. So qualitatively the same thing. In terms of access to basic needs, we continue to find a negative and very significant effect. So this is essentially the paper. Being close to a road in Africa is great for fuel, medicine, water, and whatever the other one was, fuel, medicine, water, and food. And it doesn't make any difference in terms of how good you say your life is. So that might sound like a bit of a conundrum. How can we understand that? Well, I think we need to go back to the point 2 correlation I noted at the beginning. Most of the content of how good you think your life is not explained by your access to basic needs. Access to basic needs have improved, but it seems at the same time something else has got worse. So the net effect of roads on your subjective well-being seems to be 0 in Africa. Okay, to try to understand why that comes about, we can do something called mediation or path analysis. A number of you will be familiar with this, and I'm just giving you a straightforward example here. Let's say roads improve access to schools, which they probably do. Therefore, you have better education, which you probably do. Education is good for your well-being. I think that's reasonably standard thing to say, non-controversial. If I introduce education into this regression by a standard kind of path analysis, my coefficient on distance should fall. That's a standard mediation analysis. That is not the most interesting thing I'm going to show you, but just to understand what we're going to do. Again, the Afrobarometer is really good in this respect because it reports what? I can't do this in 5 minutes. Because it reports the location of things like markets, police stations, schools, clinics, and so on, as well as self-reported experience of crime and whether you trust people, things like this. I'm not going to talk about subjective mediation for subjective living conditions because we don't get very much going on here. The only thing I note, and this is in a totally insignificant way, but it suits my story, so what the hell, is that once we control for crime, the benchmark coefficient becomes slightly more positive, which it's inconsistent with roads bringing more crime. Not significantly so, but that's the kind of story I like to tell. In terms of lack of deprivation, the mediation, and mediation means why is this number negative, is mostly explained by access to public goods. This is the thing here. So why do people have better access to water and medical and food and fuel? It's because there are more likely to be markets, more likely to be hospitals, more likely to be police stations close to roads. So roads bring these public good amenities. That's good for access to basic needs. Okay, Stephanie said I've got another half an hour, so let me finish up. Robustness checks. Every paper needs at least a 30-page appendix these days. I think ours is about 40. So we've just done millions of these things, and everything is totally brilliant, and the result is right. Let me just say that. We've done every kind of test you can possibly imagine. The last thing to say is migration. Are our results wrong because people migrate? Unfortunately, we don't know about migration in the Afrobarometer. That's one thing they don't ask. In the DHS, the Demographic and Health Surveys from the World Bank, we do know this. We know whether individuals have lived in the enumeration area continuously or whether they moved there in the past. The dependent variable here is a wealth index that the DHS themselves calculate. All I want to show you here in the remaining 37 seconds is that the results for migrants, minus 483, this is just telling you that people are wealthier, closer to roads in an instrumented way, is identical to the result for non-migrants. So whether you've lived there all your life, whether you moved to this place where there's a paved road, the effect on your wealth is the same. So we don't seem to have a big migration problem. Okay, concluding remarks, we just said all of that. So that's okay. The second concluding remark is, as I said, access to basic needs good, something else is going wrong. I couldn't really identify what had gone wrong, but we're not measuring all of these outcomes like community life, unwanted pregnancies, or something that I actually believe in, which is observing richer people as a result of trade, as a result of mobility, people coming through, makes you feel relatively poor. Okay? The same argument as the introduction of television into East Germany, where all of a sudden East Germans thought, whoa, all these people living in Munich, they got BMWs and I'm driving this crappy Lada, and making them feel relatively poor. There could be the same phenomenon going on here. Where next? We talked about optimism yesterday, Martijn. The Africans are optimistic. They're optimistic about the future, but that does not seem to be explained by whether they're close to a road or not, so that's not something that helps us to understand the level of African optimism. And the last thing I'm going to say is that we've looked at access to roads, distance to roads, as the key explanation of well-being that here in Africa, though we can do it everywhere, of course, and that's not the only thing that changes over time. And our future work in this area is disaster and discovery. Disasters happen in a arguably random way, and we have geocoded information on disasters, and slightly more positively, there are also oil and mineral discoveries that are relatively random as well, and that's exploited in this recent paper by Bhattacharya and Mamo. Okay, my overall conclusion before Stephanie absolutely kills me is that, he said, this increasing availability of data in Africa, and that's both survey data, administrative data from administrations, governments, and geocoded data, I think makes this an exciting time to be working on Africa and working on well-being in Africa as well. And I hope that we have many, many more events such as this, and thank you for your time. No idea what time it is. That was miles too long, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, it wasn't actually.
Time for some questions.
Thank you again for a very interesting take on satisfaction. But I just want to be clear, that question was about satisfaction on the standard of living.
Yeah.
In other words, a dimension of life satisfaction in everything.
It actually doesn't use the word satisfaction at all, I don't believe. I think it just says how good are your, sorry, we should be there any moment now. How would you describe your present living conditions? So it's not satisfaction, but actually maybe that's a good thing, because it puts you a little bit away from this whole critique of satisfaction measures because they're inherently comparative, they're inherently biased by individual response styles. And maybe this is as well, but it doesn't invite you to necessarily make that cognitive transformation. It's not, in that sense, it's not a satisfaction question, it's a subjective standard of living.
Evaluative question on standard of living.
Yeah.
The other question that I wanted to ask is, so after all of that, what is your policy conclusions that you draw from that?
Well, what a good question. Which brings me back to actually the bit I forgot to say in my conclusion, was that a lot of people here do public policy research. And my results here are actually kind of half-assed, to use a technical term, because they tell you about the benefits and they tell you absolutely nothing about the costs. So the first thing we need to know is not only the benefits of roads, we need to know the cost of roads. And then because we're doing public policy, to go all the way back to Jeff Sachs, we need to know whether building roads in Africa is actually a good idea relative to providing mosquito nets, anti-malarial mosquito nets, relative to fixing water supply, irrigation, drinking water, what I was talking about with Alfonso yesterday, the cleaning drinking water within homes, which is the best thing to do. We need to compare costs and benefits. Overall here, there are no benefits in terms of living conditions, but I want to know, and this is what Joe just said, I want to know why that is. If we can understand why that is and kind of turn the tap off there because of the transmission of disease or because of greater insecurity, then we may be able to make roads a vector of greater well-being in Africa. That was a very long way of saying I don't know. Sorry about that.
This is just a point. We did a book on the barometers around the globe, and the African barometer is the only one that only has a proxy measure, an objective measure of life satisfaction. And basically, it's a good point because they're looking at how democracy is making life better for people, and maybe they should stick to being objective so we don't have any problems. And thank you so much for economists doing such an imaginative story about roads. It's wonderful. And using Afrobarometer.
Well, thank you, Valerie. It's all due to my first co-author, actually, Elodie Jumai, who really pushed this whole area. So we're very grateful to her. She can't be here. Right, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for an interesting presentation. I can imagine that there's an optimum distance to live from a road because the negative effects of the roads is quite close to the road. Like, for example, noise, pollution, the crime you referred to. So have you actually checked if you take out the people that live too close to the road?
Yes.
Does it make a difference in the result? And what's the optimum distance of living from the road?
Yeah, no, very, very good point. In our 40-page appendix, when we did the robustness checks, we did remove enumeration areas, because that's, in a way, the unit of observation of distance is the enumeration area, that were too close. So if you were 500 meters or something, then maybe something really bad was happening because of excessive pollution or I don't know what, or degradation of farming land. That did not affect our main results, so that was kind of cool. But your point is actually a really good one in the sense that we're imposing a log distance relationship, parametric form. And we're just doing that because it's easy. But of course, the result could be, I mean, the real relationship could be very non-monotonic. Not only non-linear, but non-monotonic. It could go up and then go down again and then go up again. So what we also did was measure the distance to the road by bands. So I'm within 0 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, da, da, da. And there we found the relationship with the different bands was monotonic. So, there's nothing weird going on about close versus medium versus far. And that could be the case, actually, that this result is non-monotonic due to things, like land prices, for example. But yeah, we did check that. That's a good point. Thank you.
Sorry, one.
Yeah, I was leaving.
I'm Rebecca from Ghana. I'm just trying to maybe give a reason or explanation for why the tab notes may not be a reflection of standard of living. Because speaking from Ghana, tab notes are almost non-existent. So you find them for interregional, from Accra to Kumasi, you find those routes. But if you come within Accra, maybe you'd find them where the embassies are. But if you go to where we actually live, you wouldn't find that. So it doesn't, it's not dependent on how rich you are or how well you are to do or your standard of living or whatsoever. That's why maybe you are saying that. So for my country, that's.
Sorry, what would the explanation be for your country? Where you work, is that it?
So where I'm from, roads, if you want to use tag roads as a measure,
yeah,
you may not see it because it doesn't, we don't have them. So you're asking someone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you all have them, then then I'm kind of screwed. No, that's. I mean, this entire project relies on variability. I'm just going to see if I can get. If I can get Ghana up here. So Ghana is somewhere here, isn't it? Is that right? Do you want to point my finger? Where are we?
Yeah, so Ghana is somewhere there.
Yeah.
So what you would see there would be, so there are tag routes, and then there are the interregional ones. So
right.
You find them maybe from Accra to Kumasi to Kampala. But then if you want to go into the suburbs where people live.
Yeah, the first thing to say is we're dropping everyone who's close to a historic, what we call node, to a historic port, to a historic capital city, historic large city. In some densely populated countries, historically densely populated, we just may not have enough variation to do anything. So actually in our 40-page appendix, we did something called a jackknife analysis, where we in turn drop each one of the countries, including dropping Ghana, to make sure that our result is not driven by one of the countries and is only found in one of the countries and not in the other one. And almost always that jackknife analysis works. But you're absolutely right in terms of a principle. If everyone is kind of close, then there's nothing to say. There's no variation.
Please welcome or join me in saying thank you to Andrew.
Thank you, darling. Thank you.